You say Africa like it's a freaking country. It's a continent of 54 nations. So you're like, can you be a little bit more specific where we need to go back to? Okay, and if you do choose a country, fine. Are those people supposed to give me a citizenship the moment I get back? I need my reparations money if I'm gonna go back, because the reason why I need my reparations money is because you owe it, one. Two, I need to set up me a new life there if I'm gonna go back.
Something happened in Cairo that should have shaken Washington, Paris, and London to their core, yet almost nobody in the West is talking about it. At the Russia-Africa Partnership Forum, there were no speeches about aid, no lectures about governance, and no recycled promises about development. Instead, Irina Abramova, director of the Institute for African Studies of the Russian Academy of Sciences, dropped a single sentence that quietly rewrote the global power map. Africa should calculate the cost of empire and take the colonial powers to court, not protest, not negotiate. In that moment, Africa stopped being a problem to be fixed and became a creditor with a legal strategy. History was no longer a tragedy to be mourned, it was a story to be told. It became evidence to be filed, and once history is reduced to numbers, the empire loses its last hiding place. So what exactly is Africa being told to calculate? And why does this terrify the United States? Let's find out. Africa is not being asked to remember its pain. It is being asked to prove its theft. That is the quiet revolution inside Russia's proposal. For the first time, reparations are not framed as a moral plea or a historical apology. They are framed as a forensic investigation. The Institute for African Studies is building economic models that treat colonialism and neo-colonialism the way prosecutors treat organized crime, by reconstructing the entire operation, tracing every asset, and calculating the damage down to the last dollar. This is not guesswork, it is methodical. Researchers are mapping what was taken, when it was taken, who took it, and what that loss would be worth today if Africa had been allowed to develop normally. Minerals are recalculated at modern market prices. Land is valued generations. Labor is priced as unpaid human capital that built Western prosperity, while Africa was denied its own. In Niger, this means reconstructing a century of uranium extraction that powered French cities while Niger remained energy poor. In Congo, it means rebuilding the cobalt ledger that underpins the global tech industry and showing how that wealth never reached Congolese communities. In Ghana, it means calculating how gold financed Britain's industrial rise, while African industry was deliberately suppressed. In Kenya, it means tracing how settler land theft destroyed agricultural self-sufficiency and locked the economy into dependency. In Nigeria, it means proving how oil built American energy empires, while the Niger Delta was poisoned and left impoverished. But the most powerful part is not the minerals or the land. It is the opportunity cost. Russia's model calculates what Africa should have become if colonialism had never existed. What industries would have emerged? What trade networks would have grown? What technologies would have been developed? What population wealth would have accumulated? This is where the lie of underdevelopment collapses. Africa is not behind. Africa was pushed back. Every destroyed textile industry, every sabotaged steel plant, every forced cash crop economy is converted into a financial loss figure. The spreadsheet shows how Europe and the United States did not simply extract resources. They engineered African poverty to keep their own systems rich. Once this work is done, Africa does not walk into a courtroom with a story. Africa walks in with evidence, contracts, trade rules, shipping records, price histories, debt structures, currency manipulation data, and one simple legal argument. This was not development. This was organized economic crime. This is why the West is so uncomfortable with Russia's proposal, because it replaces emotional debates with something they cannot control, mathematics backed by law. You can dismiss anger. You can ignore the protest. You cannot escape a balance sheet that proves your prosperity was built on theft. And when Africa finishes building this forensic ledger, the world will face a question it has never had to answer before. Who is going to pay the bill, and what happens when Africa sends it? The moment Africa finishes its forensic ledger, the obvious question appears: who exactly is going to be taken to court? At first glance, the answer seems simple. France, Britain, Belgium, Portugal, and the other former colonial powers built their wealth directly on African extraction. Their archives are full of contracts, concession agreements, and shipping logs that show how African minerals, land, and labor were converted into European prosperity. But Russia's proposal is far more dangerous than that, because it does not stop in the 1960s. It follows the money forward into the present. This is why reparations terrify Washington. Because the legal argument does not end with what Britain did in 1890. It extends to what the US does today. Once Africa proves that colonial extraction created the original poverty, it can also prove that modern financial architecture keeps that poverty alive. Debt becomes evidence. Currency dependency becomes evident. Corporate profit flows become evidence. Sanctions become evidence of economic coercion. The United States presents itself as a benefactor. Reparations expose it as the chief beneficiary of a system built on African loss. American corporations did not just inherit African resources. They inherited the colonial supply chains that guaranteed cheap labor, weak regulation, and political control. Oil contracts in Nigeria, cobalt contracts in Congo, bauxite contracts in Guinea, and lithium contracts across southern Africa are all part of the same story. Africa remains the mine, the West remains the factory, and the profits remain offshore. Europe becomes the historical defendant. America becomes the modern defendant. And that is why Russia's proposal is not symbolic. It is surgical. It forces Africa to aim its legal case at the entire structure of Western power, not just its colonial past. The courtroom becomes a place where history, finance, and geopolitics collide. Every lecture about governance is answered with a spreadsheet. Every accusation of corruption is answered with the extraction of data. Every claim of aid generosity is answered with a balance sheet showing who really benefits. This is why the West cannot simply ignore this, because once Africa presents its full account, the narrative collapses. Africa is no longer the failing student. The West becomes the defendant, explaining why its prosperity required African poverty. And that is the moment the global order changes. Not with a revolution in the streets, but with a legal argument so precise that it rewrites who owes whom in the modern world. So when Africa sends the bill, it will not just be sent to Europe, it will land on Washington's desk. And the question is no longer whether the West will accept responsibility. The question is how it will survive when Africa proves the crime. Russia did not walk into Cairo by accident. It walked in with a strategy. For years, Moscow has watched how the United States uses economics as a weapon. Sanctions that freeze assets, banking systems that cut countries off from trade, currency pressure that collapses governments, and rules-based order language that hides raw power behind polite words. Russia understands this because it lives inside that system every day. Since 2014, and especially after 2022, it has experienced what it means to be economically besieged by the West. Africa has lived under the same siege for decades, just without the headlines. By proposing a legally grounded reparations strategy, Russia is not offering Africa sympathy. It is offering Africa a way to fight back on the one battlefield where Western power is weakest: law and legitimacy. Tanks do not win court cases. Media narratives do not erase spreadsheets. And sanctions do not work against evidence. This is why Moscow chose reparations as its weapon. Russia knows that the West's greatest strength is not its military. It is its moral narrative, the story that it tells the world, that it is rich because it is efficient, innovative, and virtuous, while Africa is poor because it is corrupt and mismanaged. Reparations destroy that story. They replace it with a legally defensible counter-narrative, that Western wealth is the product of organized extraction and African poverty is the result of enforced underdevelopment. Once that narrative is proven in court, Western power loses its legitimacy. And without legitimacy, sanctions look like bullying, aid looks like hush money, and partnerships look like a cover for exploitation. Russia also understands that Africa is not looking for a new master. It is looking for sovereignty. That is why Moscow is careful not to present itself as a savior. Instead, it provides tools, research support, legal frameworks, economic modeling, and institutional backing through the Institute for African Studies and the Ministry of Science and Higher Education. Africa builds the cases. Africa files the lawsuits. Africa controls the strategy. For Russia, this is not charity. It is a geopolitical alignment. A legally empowered Africa weakens Western dominance across energy, finance, and diplomacy. Each successful reparations case fractures the authority of the IMF, the World Bank, and the dollar system. Each court victory reduces Washington's ability to dictate terms. Each legal precedent builds a multipolar world where Africa is no longer subordinate. This is why the West reacts with silence and discomfort rather than debate. They cannot openly oppose reparations without admitting guilt. They cannot support them without dismantling their own power. Russia saw this weakness and chose it deliberately. It did not challenge the West with missiles in Africa. It challenged the West with mathematics, and that is far more dangerous. So if Russia has opened this battlefield and Africa is preparing to fight on it, what actually happens when the first case is filed and the empire is forced to answer in court? Let's pause for a second to say, big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. It will not begin with a dramatic announcement. There will be no sirens, no emergency summits, no urgent speeches from Western capitals. The first reparations case will arrive quietly as a legal document filed in an international court by an African state that has finished its forensic accounting and decided it is time to move from preparation to confrontation. The file will be heavy, precise, and devastating. Inside, it will be a complete reconstruction of a national economy that was deliberately broken. Mining contracts that show how minerals were extracted at a fraction of their real value. Trade rules that prove African industries were blocked so that Europe and America could dominate manufacturing. Land records show how settlers seized the most productive territory and converted African farmers into laborers. Financial data that traces how profits were exported while debts were left behind. And then the calculation that changes everything. Not just what was stolen, but what was never allowed to exist. The factories that were never built, the universities that were never funded, the technologies that were never developed. The middle class was never allowed to grow. Opportunity cost becomes the most powerful evidence of all, because it proves that Africa's poverty was engineered, not accidental. When this case is filed, France will be forced to defend its uranium contracts in Niger. Britain will be forced to defend land theft in Kenya and the destruction of African industry. Belgium will be forced to defend Congo's devastation. And the United States will be forced to defend the financial system that replaced colonial rule and continued the extraction under a different name. This is the moment the global narrative flips. For decades, Africa has stood in the dock, accused of corruption, instability, and failure. In that courtroom, the roles reverse. Africa becomes the plaintiff. The West becomes the defendant. Every development lecture becomes evidence of hypocrisy. Every aid pledge becomes proof of dependency management. Every sanction becomes proof of economic coercion. Even if the court hesitates, the damage is already done. Because the case is not just legal. It is political. It is moral. It is historical. It forces the world to confront a question it has avoided for centuries. If Africa is poor, where did its wealth go? And if Western nations are rich, what exactly did they do to get there? From that day onward, no Western leader can speak about partnership without being challenged by Africa's evidence. No international institution can dictate policy without being asked to justify its role in maintaining extraction. No corporation can hide behind contracts when those contracts are exposed as the continuation of an empire. The filing of the first reparations case does not end neo-colonialism overnight, but it breaks its spell. It shows Africa that the system is not natural, it is constructed, and anything that is constructed can be dismantled. So once the spell is broken and the empire is forced to answer, what does Africa actually gain from this confrontation? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. The power of reparations is not measured only in money. It is measured in what Africa is finally allowed to become once the extraction machine is broken. For generations, African development has been designed from the outside. Budgets written to satisfy the IMF energy projects built to serve Europe. Trade routes structured to feed Western factories. Every major decision has been filtered through one question: how does this benefit the West? Reparations reverse that logic. They make African development answer only to African priorities. When reparations arrive, Africa is no longer forced to choose between sovereignty and survival. Infrastructure is no longer delayed by donor conditions. Power stations are built because African industry needs them, not because Europe wants cheap electricity. Rail networks connect African markets instead of colonial ports. Digital infrastructure serves African innovation instead of foreign surveillance. Currency policy is written in African capitals instead of Washington. This is how reparations dismantle neo-colonialism in practice. They replace aid with investment that Africa controls. They replace dependency with capacity. They replace extraction with production. They replace humiliation with authority. But the most profound change is psychological. Reparations destroy the story that Africa is a failure. They prove in court that Africa's condition was manufactured by external forces. That changes how African states negotiate, how African youth imagine their future, and how Africa positions itself in the world. A continent that knows it is a creditor behaves differently from one that believes it is a charity case. This is why the United States fears this moment. Because once Africa understands its real value, it stops accepting unequal trade, predatory loans, and political blackmail. It builds alliances on its own terms. It chooses partners, not patrons. Russia understands this shift. That is why it supports a research-based, legally grounded reparations strategy rather than a symbolic apology campaign. It knows that the real battlefield is not history, it is the future. Whoever controls Africa's future controls the balance of global power. Reparations, therefore, do not close a chapter. They open a new one. A chapter where Africa funds its own industrialization, protects its own resources, and defines its own development path. A chapter where the West is no longer the gatekeeper of progress. A chapter where sovereignty is real, not ceremonial. But power always invites resistance. Once Africa begins to unlock this future, the empire will not step aside quietly. It will pressure, threaten, divide, and destabilize, because that is how it has always protected its advantage. So as reparations move from calculation to courtroom to transformation, the final question becomes unavoidable. Will the empire accept the end of its dominance, or will it fight to keep Africa in chains? When Africa finally sends the bill, the world will not change because of the money alone. It will change because a lie collapses. For centuries, Western power has rested on a simple story: that its wealth is the result of virtue, innovation, and good governance, while Africa's poverty is the result of incompetence and failure. Reparations rip that story apart. They prove, with evidence and law, that Western prosperity was built through organized extraction, and that African poverty was engineered through deliberate underdevelopment. Once that truth is established, the moral authority of the empire evaporates. This is why the United States and its allies will resist with everything they have. Not because they cannot afford to pay, but because paying means admitting the crime. It means admitting that the global order they designed is not neutral, not fair, and not benevolent. It is a system built to transfer wealth from Africa to the West and call it development. But resistance will only delay the inevitable, because Africa is no longer asking for justice. It is preparing to enforce it. With Russia's support, African states are turning memory into evidence, history into law, and suffering into a legal strategy that cannot be dismissed as emotion or ideology. The empire cannot sanction a courtroom. It cannot bomb a spreadsheet. It cannot intimidate a balance sheet that proves its guilt. This is the end of begging. It is the beginning of accounting. The year of reparations will not be a ceremony, it will be a confrontation. Each case will chip away at Western dominance. Each victory will weaken the dollar system, the IMF's authority, and Washington's ability to dictate terms. A multipolar world will not be declared, it will be built, one legal precedent at a time, and Africa will not return to its old place, because a continent that becomes a creditor does not kneel again. So the final question is not whether Africa deserves reparations. The final question is whether the empire is ready to live in a world where it must finally pay for what it stole, or whether it will expose itself completely by refusing to face the truth. Let us know in the comment section, what are they going to do? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.